Hey YouTube, Vinny M here, and welcome to another video here on the channel. Today we have another World War II reenacting informational video for you. And in today's video, we are going to be doing part 1 in a 3-part series on period correct World War II lighters. Everybody knows of the Black Crackle Zippo. Actually, that Black Crackle is a Berkeley. So everybody knows of the Black Crackle Zippo. That Black Crackle is actually a Zephyr. So yeah, everybody knows of the Black Crackle Zippo, and yes, this one is actually a Zippo. But nobody knows about all the others, such as the fact that not all of the Black Crackle Zippos were actually made by Zippo. They were made by Berkeley, and Zephyr, and Windy, and Zippo, and others. A lot of people know nothing about these lighters right here in front of you today, which are Evans and Ronson lighters. And then there are the so-called trench lighters, which include Dunhills, Parkers, Bowers, and rope lighters. The point of this series is to inform you of all of these different lighters that existed during the World War II time period and get you understanding how to recognize the differences. So in part 1, we're going to talk about these Ronson and Evans lighters, which are nearly as old by their patent dates as the Zippos are. Part 2, we will talk about the trench lighters, as they are now called, which were actually the service lighters of Dunhill, Bowers, and Parker. And in part 3, we will cover the Black Crackle lighters, which, as you've already seen a taste of, were not all Zippos. Jumping right into the topic of today's video, here on episode 1 of the series, the Ronson lighter. The Ronson lighter is a majestic little lighter. It actually has a gearing system in it, so it's quite a complex lighter. Because of its complexities, people automatically assume that it is a newer design than the now much more popular Zippo, but that's actually not true. The Ronson is actually the older of the two designs. You see, today Zippo actually owns the Ronson brand. So that's another thing that makes people assume that the Ronson came after the Zippo instead of before. The fact of the matter is that this lighter was actually patented in 1926, and Zippo's patent is from 1936. So this is 10 years older than the Zippo design. It works much like a Zippo, and this is not a comparison video between this and a Zippo, but a Zippo is what everyone is familiar with. They're familiar with how it works, what type of flint it takes, how you change the wick, how you put fuel in it. So it's easy to compare to the Zippo to help you understand. When I say that it's similar to the Zippo in a lot of ways, I'm referring to things like how you fill it. So the fill port here on the bottom reveals cotton, just like on a Zippo. You just pour the fluid in there, which is lighter fluid or kerosene, because these are oil lighters. They can actually use different types of fuel. The flint is held in place by a screw-in cap. With a spring plunger, again, very similar to the Zippo. Where the similarities end are in how it actually functions. So the mechanism on top contains a set of gears. And this plunger right here has teeth on it, which catch those gears. So when you push this down, it will spark. And all that it's doing is when you push this down, the teeth on this piece are actually catching the gears on this head right here. which has the striker mounted inside of it. So when you push this down, it basically turns the striker a quarter turn on the flint. It could be out of fuel. I've been messing with it a lot today. I actually just fixed this one. These are easy to fix. I have a bunch of them that I've made repairs to get them to work again. Despite their complexities, they're not hard to get to function. This is kind of the original Ronson right here. And then in 1941, they made some changes specifically for the war effort, where they tried to compete with the Zippo lighter that was now on the market, which was windproof. And obviously these lighters aren't windproof because there's no shroud around the flame. So they came out with this. This was their Whirlwind Ronson. Worked a little bit different. You had the same way to put a flint in it, but to put fuel in it, you just pull out and turn on the base. So they changed the way that you put fuel in it. The whole top mechanism is still the same. This one's a little hangy. I need to do a little work on it. It's just gummed up. It's got flint residue in the mechanism, which was a potential flaw with these lighters because they are so intricate. As you strike and strike and strike them, the dust from the flint will gum up the gears. They're not hard to take apart though, so it's not a big deal, but a little bit more maintenance required over time than other options. Now, what made this windproof, you might ask, because that's still not shrouded, right? Well, it can be, because you just pull up on that rim right there. If you look at the rim, there's a cut in it, and that reveals your windscreen. So you have the option to make it windproof. This was also a little bit bigger, so it held a little bit more fuel than its competition. I shouldn't say competition, just the other Ronson line of lighters. And they specifically marketed this one towards the military. There's actually an ad, which I'll show at the end of the video here, that shows this exact lighter, and it says something to the tune of meeting the needs of the war effort, something like that. There were other versions of the Ronson lighter, other manners in which they looked. You could get like tabletop versions that were like little glass jars with this on top, which you would hold in your whole hand. It would be like a lighter that sat at the center of a table that anyone at the table could just use to light their stuff, kind of like a community lighter. And because it was a community lighter, it was made to sit as a table fixture, so it wasn't a pocket lighter like these. So there was other variants, but the mechanism on the Ronson was always the same. It was always this push down gear quarter turn striker mechanism. So let me roll some of those advertisements and talk a little bit about them, and we'll jump into the Evans. Here we have a 1928 patent for the Ronson banjo lighter, as it's commonly called today, followed by a 1931 patent for a lighter more similar to the ones that you've seen me holding in this video, and then a 1931 patent for what is basically the lighter you have seen me holding in the video. This is a 1931 catalog for Ronson. It shows their lighter lineup as well as some cigarette cases that have an integrated lighter. And here, in a slightly later catalog, we see quite a luxurious lineup of Ronson lighters. In this catalog, we see the Whirlwind windproof model as well as their large table models. There's also some advertisements in here showing the Ronson production for the U.S. military, specifically the Whirlwind windproof model. And I deliberately inserted this because when I did a video on cigarette accessories previously, someone commented and said that Zippo lighters were standard issue. They were the only lighters that were standard issue, and everyone in the U.S. military got one. And that's clearly not true. Other companies clearly made them for the military. And if we look at this Enlisted Man's Equipment and Clothing Quartermaster catalog, you'll notice that as I search through different names like Ronson, Zippo, etc., there is no lighter listed as being standard issue to troops, and this is a 1945 catalog, so it's a late war catalog. There is no mention of anything in here that would light a cigarette or anything else for that matter, except for a match case. And if we search the ordnance catalogs and we search the officers' catalogs, we see the same thing. You can see here the only hit I get
is this match case. So to the guy's comment about Zippo being standard issue, here is a Zippo article on their own website under their history that says they dedicated all production to U.S. military market. U.S. military market doesn't mean it went to be standard issue. It can mean that it was being sold in the PXs. Here, yet another article says that they were not available to civilians and they were available at PXs all over the world. And when they would come in, there would be a long waiting list, again indicating sales at the PX. Here, if we look at the simple math, they made 1 million lighters by 1942. 5 years later, they had made tenfold that, which is 10 million lighters. That would be 1947, 2 years after the war is already over. Yet, that's not enough to equip the entire U.S. military, which had 16 million personnel between 1941 and 1945. Other companies made lighters for the military, not just Zippo, and none of them were truly standard issue per any quartermaster document I can find.
As you can see, the Ronson Art and Metalwork Company was pretty innovative. They continued to apply for patents even though they already had a well-designed, functioning lighter that had very few issues. They continued to update the design and try to stay on top of the market. Their initial slogan was "Push it once and it's lit, let go and it's out, Ronson." That slogan was changed in the 1950s to Ronson, lights every time. If you're a World War II reenactor or in the living history community, you may have heard that Sherman tanks in World War II were called Ronsons because when they got hit by German fire, they would light every time. The problem is that that is 100% a myth. Ronson was not using the slogan lights every time in World War II. In World War II, the slogan was push it once and it's lit, let go and it's out. And I don't think there was any tankers riding around in Sherman tanks saying, yeah, my tank is just like a Ronson lighter, push it once and it's lit and let go and it's out, because that just doesn't make any sense. So knowing your history is important when you're in the hobbies. Ultimately, despite all of Ronson's efforts, they weren't around to stay. They were bought out by Zippo. The Ronson name now belongs to Zippo, and they make very few products under the Zippo name. Mostly just lighter fuel, a couple torch lighters that are made in China, and every couple years they'll run off a batch of banjo reproduction lighters, which was their initial patent. And those are made in Japan with the Ronson name on them. And when you can find those, they run anywhere from $70 to $200. So they are a limited production Ronson item. Other than those things, Ronson is history. So we'll move on to Evans. The Evans Case Company patented its first lighter in the year 1927 into 1928. And the patent was pretty simple. It had this brass case right here, which you filled through the bottom, and it took a flint in a chamber. There was a little roller wheel on top right here that you rolled, and the wick went up through the center, and then that roller wheel would catch the wick on fire. And across the whole top of that was a bar that was hinged on this side that you simply flipped up, lit it, and then flipped that down, and it was literally a straight bar with a little bell on it, and the bell snuffed out the wick. You see it? You see all those features I'm talking about? Yeah, well, neither do I. And you know why? Because that design didn't work very well. So what did Evans Case Company do? They just decided that they would copy Ronson and infringe on every one of their patents. And that's what they did. So they came out with a lighter called a Trigolite and another lighter called the Spitfire. And that is what I'm holding. I'm holding a Spitfire. And it is a straight up blatant copy of a Ronson. So it fills through a screw port just like the Ronson. The flint is held in by a screw port with a push rod in it just like a Ronson. When I push down on the plunger, the snuffer cap is lifted out of the way, the striker turns a quarter turn, and when I let go, the snuffer cap puts the lighter out. It is exactly the same mechanism as a Ronson. And you may be wondering, how did that happen? Well, you see, the Spitfire came out in 1940, right at the beginning of World War II. Before that, the Evans Company had been dicking around with their own patent that wasn't all that popular. And the Trigolite predates this just a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure how much. So I believe you're looking at sometime in the late 30s that the patent infringement actually took place. Ronson does go after Evans for this infringement and ends up winning. And Evans has to either pay Ronson for royalties or they have to redesign their lighters. They've already tried this whole design thing on their own once and it didn't work. That's why they had the shitty first design of lighters that they had, and why they went to a design of somebody else's to begin with. So they end up just paying the royalties. The Evans lighters are made up until the 1950s and actually on into the 70s. There's not an exact date on when they went out of production, but it was sometime in the early 1970s that they stopped making these. So this is something that is correct for World War II. This specific one I'm holding, this design, the Spitfire, is of World War II origin, being right there at 1940.
Here we have the original patent document for the Evans lighter. You'll notice it doesn't look anything like the lighter I've been holding in this video. This is dated January 14th, 1930. In 1935, they patented their Trigolite lighter, which would basically be altered a little bit to make the Spitfire models a little later on. And this was the lighter that was patent infringement on Ronson's patent. Here in their catalog from the World War II time period, we see about the same catalog layout as Ronson, with the Trigolite and Spitfire lighters in various shapes, sizes, and designs, as well as table lighters and cigarette case lighters that have lighters integrated into the top of them. One difference is that the Spitfire was available with a big circular flat bowl on it, seen here, or I should call it a fuel tank. This was available in OD green crackle or black crackle during the World War II time period, as well as being available with a wind shroud, and it was marketed as a military lighter, as seen here, this one being carried by a corporal in the U.S. Army. This doesn't give very good credence to the people that say the only military lighters were the Zippo lighters, and pretty much proves that lighters of all brands were carried by U.S. troops throughout the war.
As you can see, Evans pretty much copied Ronson's entire product line to a T. That's something we don't really see all that often between American companies, especially in that time period that these lighters are from. It's happened. Colt and Smith & Wesson had a huge falling out in the late 1800s, early 1900s that was very, very similar with patents on revolvers. So it has happened, it's just not all that common. Today, we expect patent infringement. If an American or a British or a Belgium, German, French, Spanish, whatever company patents something, we expect the Chinese to reproduce it 6 months after it hits the market in its entirety and sell it for half the price. That's just the modern world. But during the time period that this conflict between these two companies took place, it's not something that really happened all that much, especially not between two domestic companies. So there's a lot of interest there just in the history of this particular design of lighters. Ultimately, this design of lighter predates the Zippo, was more prominent than the Zippo for a period of time prior to Zippo's existence, and even for a period of time thereafter. And because of that, they are entirely correct for a World War II impression. You just don't see anybody using them for impressions, which is kind of sad because you're giving all that history to the Zippo and nobody else, despite the fact that there's this huge plethora of other lighters out there. And ultimately, these lighter companies supported the war effort as much as Zippo did. You saw the advertisement where Ronson invented this design of lighter specifically for military service. These were not issued lighters as far as I can tell. They were private purchase, but that is also true of the Zippos. Issued lighters were actually rather few and far between, and you don't typically find lighters in any of the catalogs for the Army Quartermaster Corps, you only find match cases. So ultimately, these are a great World War II living history or reenacting impression item because they were prevalent during the time, but not represented very much today in the hobby. That's all I have for you guys. Be sure to tune in for part 2 and part 3. As always, like and subscribe, and have a nice day.